I signed the papers at 11:47 at night, sitting at my kitchen table in the dark, with only the light above the stove on. My lawyer had driven out to Oakville specifically for this. She brought her own notary. The pen scratched across the page, and that was it. 41 years of mortgage payments, of fixing the roof in 1998, of refinishing the hardwood floors myself over 2 weekends, when my knees still let me do that sort of thing. All of it locked up tight where my son-in-law couldn't touch it. He had no idea I'd figured it out. Let me go back to the beginning. My name is Gordon. Wait, no. My name is Alistair. Alistair Bryce. I'm 68 years old. I live in Oakville, Ontario, in the same house I bought with my late wife, Helen, in 1983. We paid $147,000 for it. The neighbors think it's worth somewhere around $1.4 million now. I don't think about that number much. It's a house. It's where Helen planted her garden. It's where our daughter Moira learned to ride her bike in the driveway and scraped both knees so badly she still has the scars. Helen died 22 months ago. Ovarian cancer. She was 64. We had no warning, or rather, the warning came so late, it was almost the same as no warning at all. 8 months from diagnosis to the end. I'm not going to describe those 8 months. Some things you keep. Moira was here for most of it. She drove in from Hamilton every weekend, sometimes twice a week. Her husband Trent came when he could, which was less often than you'd think given that they don't have children, and he works from home. But I didn't say anything about that. You don't keep score when your wife is dying. After the funeral, after the relatives went back to wherever they came from, and the casserole stopped arriving, and the sympathy card stopped, and the house got very, very quiet, I made myself a schedule. It's the only thing that kept me upright those first few months. Coffee at 6:30. Walk along the lakefront path by 8. Grocery shopping on Wednesdays. My friend Desmond, who I've known since we worked together at the steel company in the 90s, we started having lunch every Thursday at a diner on Lakeshore. It was something to look forward to. Moira called every Sunday evening. We talked for an hour, sometimes more. She'd tell me about work. She manages a dental office in Hamilton, and about the renovations she and Trent were doing on their house. And she'd ask about whether I was eating properly, whether I'd been out, whether I'd called Dr. Mehta about my blood pressure. For about 14 months, this was my life, and it was enough. Then, last February, she called on a Tuesday. Her voice was strange, tight in a way I recognized. It's the same voice she had when she was a teenager and had to tell me something she'd been putting off. "Dad," she said, "Trent and I need to talk to you about something." My first thought was that they were separating. They'd had a rough patch a few years back. Nothing they told me directly, but you notice things the way people talk around each other on the phone. The silences. But it wasn't that. "We're in trouble financially," Moira said. "Real trouble." Trent had been contracting for a tech firm out of Mississauga for 3 years. The contract wasn't renewed in January, no warning. He'd been applying since then. But the market was bad, really bad, and nothing had come through. Meanwhile, Moira had taken a pay cut at the dental office when they lost 2 of their dentists to a corporate chain and the practice shrunk, and their variable mortgage rate had adjusted twice in the past year. "How much are we talking?" I asked. There was a pause. "It's not just money, Dad." She explained it carefully, the way you explain something when you've practiced it. They couldn't keep the house in Hamilton, not with the mortgage payments and Trent out of work. They'd been thinking about options. And the thing was, I was alone in this big house, 4 bedrooms, only me, and I wasn't getting younger. And wouldn't it make sense if they moved in for a while? Help with expenses, help around the house. Trent could fix the things that needed fixing, and I wouldn't be alone. I sat there with the phone pressed to my ear, and I thought about how quiet Sunday afternoons were. "Let me think about it," I said. I thought about it for a week. I called Desmond and had lunch twice that week instead of once. I didn't tell him what I was considering. I just wanted to be around someone who knew me well. In the end, I said yes. They moved in the first weekend of March. The first few weeks were fine. More than fine, honestly. Moira cooked on weeknights. The house smelled like food again. I could hear someone else moving around upstairs, and I hadn't realized how much I'd missed that. Just the sound of another person in the house. Trent was helpful enough in a general way. He fixed the gate latch that had been sticking, set up a new router so the internet worked in the back of the house. He's tall and broad, one of those men who takes up a lot of space in a room and seems to know it. Small things started bothering me maybe 6 weeks in. I noticed that the mail was often already opened on the front table when I got to it in the morning. When I mentioned it, Trent said he'd been sorting it, making sure my bills were organized. I told him I'd been organizing my own mail for 50 years, and that was the end of that conversation, or so I thought. I noticed Moira asking about my RSP twice in 1 week. Casual questions slipped into other conversations. How much was in it? Whether I'd looked at it lately? Whether I'd thought about what I'd do with it eventually? I noticed Trent spending time in my office, not doing anything obvious, just often seeming to be in there when I'd walk past. He said he used it to take work calls because the reception was better near the window. The window in my office faces the side of the neighbor's house. There's nothing special about the reception there. I noticed Moira stopping conversations when I came into the kitchen. Not every time, but enough times that I started noticing the silence before she continued. I told myself I was being suspicious, that they were stressed, that financial pressure does things to people, that Moira was my daughter and I knew her. I knew her. The thing that changed everything was a Thursday. I'd come back from lunch with Desmond earlier than usual because he had a physiotherapy appointment. I let myself in through the side door and Trent didn't hear me. He was on the phone in the kitchen, standing at the counter with his back to the hallway. Just needs to understand it's the simplest way to do it, he was saying. A joint account would be the first step. Once his name's on it with mine, I can manage things from there. He's been agreeable. He's not the type to make a fuss. He laughed. Whoever was on the other end of the phone said something. The house is the main thing, Trent said. Everything else is secondary. I stood in the hallway for a moment. Then I went back out the side door as quietly as I'd come in. I sat in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes. I called my lawyer from the car. Her name is Suzanne Bakshi, and she had handled Helen's estate and our wills, and I trusted her the way you trust someone who's been professionally honest with you for 15 years. I didn't go back inside until I'd spoken to her. She told me to come to her office the next morning and not to say anything in the meantime about anything financial, not to agree to anything, not to sign anything. And Alistair, she said, write down what you just told me. Exact words as close as you can remember. Tonight. I wrote it down. Suzanne's office is on Trafalgar Road, above a dry cleaner. She was waiting for me when I arrived, and she closed the door and let me talk. When I was done, she was quiet for a moment. Has Moira seemed different to you? She asked. Not Trent. Moira. I didn't answer right away. The honest answer was complicated. She seemed worried, I said. She's been worried since they moved in. But not about the same things she used to worry about. Suzanne nodded. She told me a few things about Ontario state law. She explained what a joint account actually means legally, that the other person has full access and full legal claim to those funds, not merely signing access in an emergency. She explained that a continuing power of attorney for property in Ontario grants sweeping authority and can be obtained under conditions that are difficult to challenge later, if not properly witnessed. She told me she'd seen families in situations like this one, and that the progression tends to follow a pattern. I asked her what I should do. We're going to protect your assets properly, she said. A real estate lawyer I trust, new documents, a proper inter vivos trust where you maintain full control. We'll put the house in a structure Trent can't touch regardless of what else happens. And there's someone I want you to speak with. A man named Clive Worthington. He consults on elder financial exploitation cases. He works with the OPP and the Seniors Abuse Line. I told her that felt extreme. It probably is extreme, she said. I hope it is. But Alistair, what you heard in that kitchen is not nothing. Describing you as not the type to make a fuss. Talking about the house as the main thing. That's a man who's made a plan. The question is how far along the plan is. I met Clive the following Monday at a coffee shop on Spears Road. He was in his late 50s, Retired OPP, patient in the way that only certain kinds of experienced people are patient. He let me talk for a long time without interrupting. Afterward, he said, "Tell me about Desmond, my friend. You mentioned Trent's made comments about him." I had mentioned it almost in passing. A few times, Trent had said things about Desmond. That he seemed like a lonely guy who talked a lot. That he was probably not great for my blood pressure. That old friendships could be draining. Nothing you could point to. The kind of thing that slides past you, unless you're looking for it. Classic soft isolation, Clive said. Subtle enough that you don't notice it as a pattern. Significant enough that it has an effect. How often are you seeing Desmond these days compared to when Moira and Trent first moved in? I counted. It had gone from weekly to every other week. There had been 2 Thursdays in a row where something came up. "Let me ask you something directly," Clive said. "Do you feel like you can make decisions freely in your own home right now?" I sat there with my coffee and I thought about it honestly. "Less than I used to," I said. Clive outlined what he wanted to do. He wanted to place 2 small audio recording devices in the house. Under Ontario law, one-party consent applies to private conversations. Since I lived there and consented, the recordings would be legal. He also wanted me to keep a written log, daily, of any conversations or incidents that seemed relevant. Dates, times, exact words where possible. "And don't change anything," he said. "Don't act differently. Don't confront anyone. Don't mention Suzanne. Just watch." For 3 weeks, I watched. I came home from the lakefront walk one morning, and I made myself a coffee, and I sat at the kitchen table, and I read the paper, and I was as ordinary as I've ever been in my life. And that evening, from the small device Clive had placed behind a bookshelf in the living room, we recovered 47 minutes of conversation between Moira and Trent. I listened to those recordings, sitting in Clive's car in the parking lot of a Canadian Tire in Mississauga on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Clive played them on a laptop. He'd made written notes alongside the timestamps. The first thing that hit me was Moira's voice. It was still her voice. That's what I wasn't prepared for. It was my daughter's voice, the same voice that called me every Sunday, and she was talking about the assessed value of the house and whether the market would hold through autumn. Trent did most of the talking. He had a plan, and it had steps. The first step was getting me added to a joint checking account at the bank, or rather, getting himself added to my account, which he intended to frame as a safety measure. He had already spoken to someone at a branch. He'd mentioned to the person that his father-in-law was getting on in years and sometimes confused about finances. That last part landed like something cold on the back of my neck. I was not confused about my finances. I have never been confused about my finances. The second step in Trent's plan involved a financial advisor he knew who apparently specialized in helping families restructure assets when an elderly parent was involved. The framing throughout the recording was always about helping me, protecting me, doing what responsible family members do. But the beneficiary of every plan they discussed was not me. Moira said at one point quietly, "What if he doesn't go along with it?" Trent said, "He'll go along with it. He wants to believe we're here to help." People want to believe that about their kids. He's already halfway convinced himself everything is fine. Moira didn't say anything after that for a while. I listened to that, and I looked out the Rain Street window of Clive's car at the parking lot. And I thought about a Saturday afternoon in 1991 when Moira was 7 years old and she came into the kitchen crying because she'd broken her friend's toy and didn't know how to tell her. And Helen and I sat with her at the table and talked through what she should do. And she cried. And then she nodded and she went and told her friend and came home lighter. I raised her. I was there for that. I said to Clive, "Is there any chance I'm misreading this?" He said very gently, "No." We recorded for 3 more weeks. By the end, Clive and Suzanne between them had documentation of a clear and consistent pattern. Trent's conversations with a financial advisor about consolidating my assets under a power of attorney. Moira's conversation with her cousin about the situation with Dad and how they expected it to be resolved by the end of the year. Trent's second call, this time recorded, where he described me as cooperative and said the groundwork was almost done. There was a conversation 11 days before the end, where Trent told Moira that once the house was transferred into a joint ownership structure, he'd already had a lawyer sketch out. They could list it within 6 months. He'd already spoken to an agent. He thought they could get $1.35 million in the current market. He had a number in mind for what they'd put me in, a retirement residence in Burlington. A decent one, nothing embarrassing, around $4,200 a month. Moira said, he's going to be devastated. Trent said, he'll adjust. It'll be a relief for him, honestly. He's rattling around in that house alone. This is practical. I don't know why that one hit hardest. Maybe because it was so certain. He'll adjust. Not a question, not a doubt. He'll adjust. The way you talk about moving furniture. Suzanne and Clive and I met 3 times in the final 2 weeks to plan. Suzanne had already had the house placed into a proper trust structure, a legal, ironclad instrument under Ontario law, where I am the sole trustee and Desmond, and a certified professional trustee are named as successors. It had been registered with the province. The house was no longer something that could be transferred without my explicit written consent, verified by a neutral third party. Then we set a date. I came home on a Friday afternoon and I told Moira and Trent I'd been having some trouble sleeping, that I'd been thinking about what they'd said, that maybe they were right, that I needed to think about the future more seriously. I said I'd like to sit down with Trent's financial contact, that I was ready to listen. Trent's expression when I said that, I've thought about it since. It was practiced. He nodded slowly, carefully, the way a person does when they don't want to look too pleased. Reschedule the meeting for the following Wednesday afternoon. On Wednesday morning, before they were up, I drove to Suzanne's office and signed the final documents confirming the trust instrument and my full legal capacity. Suzanne notarized everything. She had a colleague present as a second witness. At 2 o'clock, Moira and Trent sat down at the dining room table across from me. Trent had brought a folder. He set it on the table the way people set down something they've been carrying for a long time. I had also invited people. Suzanne sat to my right. Constable Renee Afalabi from Halton Regional Police sat to my left. She handled financial crimes and elder abuse cases, and Clive had worked with her before. A representative from the senior safety line who Clive knew, a woman named Iris, sat near the window. Desmond, who is a retired Crown attorney and knows more about Ontario law than most people who practiced it, sat at the far end. Trent looked at each of them in turn. Then he looked at me. "What's going on?" he said. "I was hoping you could tell me," I said. We played 23 minutes of the recordings. Not all of them. Just the ones Suzanne and Clive had selected. The clearest, the most specific. The ones that left the least room for alternative interpretation. Moira started crying at the third recording. Not performative crying. She went very still and then her face did something, and she started crying quietly into her hands. I looked at her and I felt something I didn't expect, which was grief. Not anger. Grief. Like something had already ended and I was only now catching up to it. Trent tried several things. He said the conversations were out of context. He said he'd been stressed and talking out loud about options, not making actual plans. He said he was trying to protect me. Constable Afalabi listened to all of it without expression. When he stopped talking, she said, "Mr. Malov, Trent Gallagher, financial exploitation of a person 65 years or older is an offense under both the Criminal Code of Canada and the Ontario legislation governing elder abuse. Depending on how the Crown assesses the evidence, you may be looking at charges of fraud and breach of trust. I'd recommend you speak to a lawyer before saying anything further." Suzanne handed him and Moira each a formal notice. They had 2 weeks to vacate. All documents they had accessed or photographed from my office were to be inventoried and returned. The joint account Trent had been attempting to arrange had been flagged with the bank and frozen pending review. Moira looked up from the notice. She looked at me, not Trent. Just me. "Dad," she said. "I'm sorry. I didn't say anything." They were gone by the following Saturday. The criminal process in Ontario moves slowly. I was told that up front. Elder financial exploitation cases often do, particularly when no money has actually been transferred yet. After several months, Trent was charged under the criminal code with fraud with counseling a person to commit fraud in relation to the financial advisor conversations. His lawyer negotiated. The result was a conditional sentence, 3 years of probation, restitution of my legal costs, which came to just over $12,000, and a mandatory program through the John Howard Society focused on financial accountability. No custody. Suzanne told me that was standard for a first offense where the scheme didn't succeed. The system acknowledges what almost happened, not what didn't. Moira was not charged. The recording showed someone who went along, who didn't stop it, but who also flinched at several key moments. Constable Afalabi explained the threshold for charges and where Moira fell relative to it. I understood. Legally. I'm still working out what I think about it in other ways. I have not spoken to Moira since they moved out. She sent a card in October. Handwritten. 3 pages. She didn't make excuses. She said she knew she'd failed me. She said she'd been somewhere dark and had let Trent make her smaller than she was. She said she didn't expect forgiveness, only wanted me to know that she saw clearly now what had happened and that she was ashamed. She's in therapy. She and Trent are separated. The card is in the kitchen drawer. I haven't thrown her away. My mornings are the same as before. 6:30 coffee. The walk along the lake. Desmond on Thursdays, reliably, no canceled weeks. I'm back at the library Wednesday mornings, shelving returns in the local history section, which I find more satisfying than I can reasonably explain. The house is quiet, the way it was quiet before, except now, the quiet feels different. Before it was a quiet that had a hole in it, the shape of Helen, the shape of all the sounds that used to be in the house and weren't anymore. This quiet is complete. Everything in it belongs to me. I'm 68 years old. The house is in a trust. The papers are signed. Desmond and a licensed trustee in Toronto are the successors, and there are more legal obstacles between my assets and anyone with bad intentions than most people will encounter in a lifetime of financial planning. Suzanne spent 3 months making sure of it. My son-in-law thought I didn't understand what was happening. He thought I was a man who wanted to believe things were fine and could be managed because of that. He thought the house was close enough to his that he could simply wait. He was wrong on all of it. I sit on the back porch now in evenings when the weather allows it. Helen's garden has got away from me somewhat. I won't pretend otherwise. The hostas are fine, but the roses need attention. I haven't had the heart to give them yet. Maybe in the spring. There's a bench she picked out at a shop in Niagara-on-the-Lake years before she got sick. Teak, very solid, and I sit on it and I drink my tea and I watch the yard go dark and I think about what it means to protect something. The house is mine. It was always mine. The difference is that now no one can argue with the paperwork. If you're watching this and something in it felt familiar, not in a general way, in a specific way, in the way where you recognized a voice or a conversation or a particular kind of silence, then please hear this. What you're feeling is probably right. People who love you do not describe you as cooperative. People who are helping you do not calculate what they'll get when you're gone. Trust your instincts. They exist for a reason. Get a lawyer who works for you, only you, not the family, not the situation, you. Talk to someone outside the house. Document what you're seeing. Do it before you need to. I wish I'd moved faster. I was lucky the plan hadn't gone further before I heard what I heard. Not everyone is that lucky. I protected myself. I did what I had to do. And I would do it again. Some things you don't compromise on. Your home is one of them. Your sense of yourself, who you are, what you built, what you're worth, that's another. No one gets to decide that for you. Not for money, not for anything. I'm still here. It cost me something I haven't finished grieving, but I'm still here. I've had a lot of time to think about cause and effect since all of this ended. Not in any mystical sense. Just the plain, ordinary way that choices accumulate into consequences, the way water finds the lowest point, eventually no matter what's in the way. Trent made a series of choices, each one small enough on its own to seem reasonable. Move in to help. Ask questions about finances. Frame every conversation around concern. Position himself as the responsible one, the practical one, the one who was simply doing what needed doing. Each individual step was defensible. Taken together, they formed something else entirely, and the thing about patterns is that they don't care whether you name them out loud. They exist regardless. What I keep coming back to is this. He chose to treat me as a problem to be managed, rather than a person to be respected. That choice had a logic to it, and the logic ran all the way to its conclusion. It just didn't run the direction he expected. Because I made choices too. I chose to listen to the discomfort I felt. Instead of talking myself out of it, I chose to call Suzanne from a parking lot rather than go back inside and pretend I hadn't heard what I heard. I chose to sit across from Clive and be honest about how much my own instincts had already been telling me. Those choices also accumulated. They also found their conclusion. I don't think what happened to Trent was punishment in any designed sense. I think it was outcome. He built a structure on the assumption that I was passive, credulous, and desperate for connection. When that assumption turned out to be wrong, the structure had nothing to stand on. That's not justice from the outside. That's just what happens when a plan meets reality. The harder thing is Moira. I raised her to be honest. I sat with her at a kitchen table when she was 7 and talked her through why telling the truth, even when it was embarrassing, was the only way through. She knew that. And she still went along with something she knew was wrong for long enough that it mattered. That's not Trent's doing entirely. She made her own choices. What I've had to accept is that love, real love, doesn't exempt people from their own failures. I loved her through all of it. I still do, in whatever complicated form that takes now. But love isn't the same as trust, and trust has to be rebuilt from something actual, not from sentiment. The 3 things that carried me through this were simple enough that they almost sound inadequate when I say them out loud. I paid attention. I asked for help from people who weren't emotionally involved. And I acted before I was certain, because waiting for certainty would have been waiting too long. That's the whole of it, really. Not cleverness. Not luck, though. There was some of that. Just the willingness to take seriously what I was seeing and to do something about it before it was too late. The house is still here. Helen's bench is still in the garden. The paperwork is in order. I'm still here, too.